Sometimes I forget to do that. Okay, so started the recording. Okay, and as I always say, the recording for those who want to share this with colleagues and stuff. Usually the recording will be available on Monday. Sometimes on rare occasions Friday, late Friday afternoon, but usually Monday or Tuesday. Okay, so this is the latest in our series of training webinars. Again, hopefully everybody can see my screen okay. And today's topic, I am David Fass. I'm the trainer at InetSoft, and I've been conducting these things for a while now. So let's take a look at today's topic. I'm going to page all the way forward, and we're going to look at the topic of what-if analysis, which is basically kind of a hypothetical experimentation with your data. In other words, projection, right? You're trying to see what would happen to certain measures based on certain conditions, right? So, case A might happen, case B might happen, case C might happen. You want to see what's going to happen in the future based on which of those cases actually transpires. So that's kind of the idea behind what-if analysis, testing different scenarios. So so we will do this dashboard that you see on the screen in front of you, and basically what this is a very, very simple example of a projection. It takes, in the picture here, it's taking the average of a set of actual monthly sales. That's what you have in the blue line. These are the actual sales totals. And then it projects out. You can see that the last actual value here is in December of 2014. That's where our data actually ends. But then this model basically projects out the future sales based on just a single parameter, which is the growth rate. So it's a very simple example. You can pick a growth rate, and then you'll see this green line change in various ways that will reflect that growth that you select. And the starting point for the projection is basically in this picture, it's the average of the actual data. So you're starting, you basically say, okay, what's my premise for where I'm going to begin? Well, let's just take an average of the actual sales, and we'll start from there and then project the growth. So so the dashboard is very, very simple. It's unlikely that you would actually make or need to make anything this simple, but I want to show you the kind of the nuts and bolts behind getting this thing to work. And for those of you who have been in the full training, you may have done a similar example to this. So this, in that case, this will be a refresher for you. So most of what's going on here is actually taking place in a worksheet that we're going to create. So we're going to create a worksheet that contains both the actual data, the past data, and the future data, the projection. And then the chart here is basically just going to reflect that data that we compute in the worksheet. And the slider down here, this input component, is basically just going to give us access, a control point into the worksheet that will adjust the parameter. So let me close this and open up my, I've got the portal open and running here in the background, so I'm going to go into Visual Composer. Okay, so I've got the Visual Composer open, and I created a worksheet that I'm just going to begin working from. I called it What If Analysis Example, and it's nothing more than just a single data block. Right? So this is just it's just a data block that I built from our sample order model, and you can see it just has a few different fields: category, name, state, region, first name, total, and date. There's not that much else to say about it. So what I want to do first is I want to get my actual monthly sales, and I want to identify them as actual sales. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a mirror of this guy. All right, so I'll do a mirror. A mirror is just a copy that retains a link back to the parent. Right? And in this mirror, I'm going to group and aggregate. So I'm just going to, in this mirror, group it. I'll group it by month. So I'm grouping the date field by month, and then for each month I want to aggregate the totals, sum up the totals. So this grouping that I'm doing here is basically just saying give me my summed totals month by month, so I'll get a single total for each month. Okay, so that's the grouping and aggregation, and I'll rename this guy as orders grouped. And if we were to take a look at it, if I right-click and select Live Preview. All right, so this is basically what you have, right? So I've got the month by month. It goes, the earliest month in our data set, our sample data set is March 2011, goes through December 2014, which is the final month in our data set, and for each month I've got the total. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another mirror of this guy. Okay, and basically my main purpose for creating the mirror is that I want to add an expression column. I can't do that over here, right? So I can't do that in the group table. So what there's no button for creating an expression column. So what I'll do is I'll make a mirror of it, right-click, and select mirror. All right, and now I have another mirror, and this one I'll name as monthly actuals. In this case, I'm taking care not to put a space in the name of the data block, and the reason that I'm avoiding doing that is because we're going to write a little bit of script later on in about 5 minutes or so, and when you're writing script to access data in data blocks, it's helpful not to have spaces in the names of the data blocks. It simplifies the syntax of the script if they don't have spaces, so that's why I'm not putting any spaces in the names. Okay, so I've changed the name, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to, well, first of all, right now, if we take a look at this, if I do a live preview, right, so this is just the same, it's just the same as the parent data block that I mirrored it from. It's month-by-month totals. The format of the months, it looks a little bit different, but it is the same data. And what I want to do is I want to add an expression column that will just identify all of these rows as being actual results, actual sales. All right, so to do that, I'll press the little FX button in the toolbar here, and that will create an expression column, and I'll give it the name type. That's going to be the name of the new column. Press OK. And that opens the expression editor, and then my expression is going to be very simple. It's simply going to be, I just want to return the word actual. So I'm just, it's just a script that's just returning a string that says actual. And you can see that now basically every row in that type column just returns the word actual. Now, incidentally, I usually mention this at the beginning of each training session, but I forgot to, but it could be important, and that is that by default you are all muted. All right, so I can't hear you if any of you are trying to talk to me. That's why previously I asked for you to chat me in the question box or in the chat box. So, so just be aware, if you need to ask me any questions, you'll have to type them either in the question box or the chat box. Okay, but let's proceed ahead, assuming there are no questions thus far. So I've created this data block called monthly actuals. I've added this expression column, so all of these values are now designated as actual. And then the other thing that I want to do here is I just want to sort them so that the last month, in other words, the final month in the data set, is listed first. Right, and I can do that just by sorting the column. There's a sort button in the month column. So if I press that once, then I get an ascending sort. So it starts from the first month, month in the data set, and goes down to the last month. If I press that button again, then I get a reverse sort. So now the first row here is December 2014. So this is the group for December 2014. Now the reason that I'm doing that is because when I write my script in a few minutes, it'll make it easier because I need to access both that that final month, December 2014. I need to find out what that final month is, because when I do my projection, I want to project forward from that month, right? So I need to know what that month is, and I also need to know what that total is, because in my projection, I'm going to use that final total that I know to project forward. And then later on, we'll also consider, projecting forward based on an average. But for starters, we'll project forward just based on the final total. So the reason that I'm sorting this is as a convenience, right? If I know these guys are in the first row, if I know the final month and the final month total are in the first row of this table, then I can just refer to them in script using index 0. If I had not sorted the table this way, then I would need to figure out what row they are actually in, right? If they're in row 37, right, I need to figure out that they're in row 37 so I can access them. It's not such a big deal to do that, but seems unnecessary if I could just sort and then access them easily. Okay, so let's move on. So that's my monthly actuals. Now what I want to do is I want to create another table that will give me my monthly projected values, which is basically going forward into the future. Now before I do that, of course, those projected values are going to be based on some model, right? I mean, I'm not just going to pick random numbers. The idea is that I'm going to use some model of growth that will take me from the present into the future. So before I create that table of projected values, I'm going to define the parameter in my model, and of course it's a very simple model. It just has one parameter, which is the growth rate. So I'm going to create an embedded table where I can enter the growth rate. Right? So what I do is I go up to the New Object button over here, press New Object. All right, there's an option here for Embedded Table. Select that. And I'm just going to, over here, draw an embedded table that has 1 column and 3 rows. And you can see that when I do that, basically what I end up is with a single data cell. All right, so the first row becomes the column, the title bar. The second row becomes the column header, and the third row I can enter some data. And in there, I'm just going to enter a number, a hypothetical growth rate like 5%, which I write as 0.05. Okay, now I'm going to just do a little bit of naming here and also set the column type. So the name of this embedded table, I'll call this rate. That's just the name of the table. And the name of the column I can change to something like growth rate. Okay, so there's an embedded table. The table name is rate, the column name is growth rate, and in the column I can enter some hypothetical future growth rate. Now what you want to do when you're doing an embedded table is make sure you have the correct column type, right? Because right now it's basically treating this number as text. I don't want it to do that because I want to be able to use that number as a number. So I'm going to right-click on the column header and select column type, and just set the column type to something more appropriate like double. Okay, so now that's being treated as a number, and now I have the parameter that I'm going to use in my model, and of course I can type in there and change that at any time. If I wanted 7% growth rate, I could do that. If I wanted negative 7% growth rate, I could put a minus there. So I've got, that's how I'm going to modify my parameter within the worksheet. And later on we'll see within the dashboard how we can hook up an input control to this parameter so that the input control will modify the parameter. Okay, so now we've got the parameter, we can go ahead and we can create our projected table, our projected monthly table. So I'm going to begin by creating another embedded table. So I'll go to New Object, Embedded Table. And this one I'm going to make, I'll make a single column and a few rows. Okay? Now this column I'm not actually going to use because all of the columns that I'm going to put in this embedded table are going to be expression columns because I want the month, the future month, so I'm going to have to compute out a few future months, and I want the totals, those are also going to be computed, and then I want another type column like we have here, but the type column for this table will say projected. So all of those columns are going to be expression columns. So this column I don't need, but I'll just leave it there for the time being, and I'll move this guy a little bit off to the side here so it doesn't get in the way. And I'll rename this table here as a monthly projected. Oops. And then I'm going to create the first expression. And the first expression is basically going to be the following. I want to look into the monthly actual table and find out what was the last month in there, right? And in the first row here, in the first row of this new table, well, it'll be actually in the next column that we're going to make, but in the first row of that new column that we're going to make, I want to simply copy that last month. So the first column over here, the first row over here is going to be the same last month from the monthly actuals table. And then what I want to do in the succeeding rows is I want to, in each case, look one row up, find out what the previous month was, and that will give me the month for that row. So that's the script that I want to write. So here we go. I'm going to press the FX button in this table here, and I'll call this, I'll just call the name of this column month, similar to what, similar to that guy over there. Okay, and that creates, you can see that creates a new column here, new expression column. And then the expression that I'm going to write is something like this. I'll explain it as I go along. I'll say if row is equal to 1, right? What does that mean? Well, basically, row is a variable that you have available for free. Row tells you what row the script is executing in, right? So the idea behind these kinds of expression columns is that the script that you write is going to execute in each row, right? And within the script, you can detect what row the script is executing on by using this keyword called row. So what I've just written here is a test to determine, is the script executing in row 1, the first row? And then I want to say, if so, then what I want to do is I want to look into the monthly actuals table, and I want to pick off the month in that first row. So here's the syntax for doing that. You use the name of the table, right? The name of this table is monthly actuals. So if I want to look into that table, I use the name of the table, and then open square bracket, and then the name of the column that I want to look into. In this case, I want to look into this month column, but the actual name of this column, you can see it, it's kind of hidden behind the sort symbol. The actual name of the column is month parentheses date. I'll show that to you later, but all right. So this is this is the actual name of the column. All right. A month parentheses date, that's the name of that column. So what I have so far tells me look into the monthly actuals table and look into the month parentheses date column, right? And now I want to say pick off the element in the first row, and the rows are indexed from 0, so that would be the index 0 row. Right? So that's what I want. So basically what I'm saying here is if this script is executing on the first row of this table, then what I want to do is simply retrieve the value in the first row of the month column in the monthly actuals table. Okay, so that's the first part of the script. Now, what happens in the other rows? So now we've taken care of the first row. The first row is just going to pick off the month from the basically December 2014. Right, so that will be returned in the first row. Now, for the other rows, what I want to do in each row is I want to look one row above and then add a month to whatever you find up there. So in the second row over here, I want to look into the first row, add a month to that, and then return the result. All right, so the way that I do that is with a function called date add. All right, so I'll write else, and then I'm going to use this function called date add. And basically, date add takes 3 arguments. The first argument is the interval. In other words, when you want to add a date, in other words, return a date by adding a certain period of time to a given date. First of all, you have to specify what that period of time is measured in. In this case, I'm going to measure it in months. The second argument is the amount, right? So M in quotes followed by a 1 means count 1 month into the future. And then, of course, you have to specify the date from which you want to count. And basically, the date from which I want to count is the date that appears in the cell 1 row above. And the syntax for accessing that cell is this. It's field, and then a -1 in square brackets, and then the name of the column. And the name of the column here is month. And so I'll just go over this just to make sure that everybody understands. So basically what this function is, this syntax here, field, open brackets -1, and then brackets month, what this says is look one cell up in the month column. So in other words, when this script is executing on the second row, this says look into the first row and get me that value and then add 1 month to it. Right? And when this script is executing in the fourth row, what this means is look one cell up, which is the third row, right? Get me the value there, get me the month there, and add 1 month to it and return the result. So that's the way this thing works. Okay, so that's the script, and basically what this is doing is it's just projecting forward a set of months. Right? So let's see if it works, and if anybody has questions about the script, I'll be happy to answer, so I'll press OK. All right, and you can see that the script is repeated in each row. Now, the reason that we're not actually seeing any months there is because I haven't told it that I want to see the data. So what I'll do is I'll switch this to live preview, and then I'll just do a sanity check here, take a look at what I'm getting. Right, so you can see that in the first row, it's just picking off the first row's month from the monthly actuals table. Right, so there's December 2014, and then what that script does, as I just said, is in each succeeding row, it looks one row up and then adds a month to that value. So in the second row here, I get January 2015, then February 2015, and so on. You can see that each month is represented as the first of the month. That's just a formatting consideration, but basically now what I have is a projection into the future. Now, how many months do I want to project into the future? I can decide on that based on how many rows I put in this embedded table. So right now it looks like I'm projecting about 10 months or so, maybe less, maybe 8 months into the future. Right? Let's say that I wanted to project 24 months into the future. So what I would do is I would just go to the properties for this embedded table and just change the row count to whatever I want, 24 or 20 or whatever length of projection I want. Press OK, right? And then this basically this embedded table grows to whatever number of rows you specify, and there's nothing else you need to do because that expression will just execute on as many rows as you have. So if I make this embedded table 300 rows, then that expression will simply take me 300 months into the future. Okay, anyway, let's maybe I'll just set that back to something like 18. Right, so I'll get 18 months into the future. Okay, so now we've got the months. The next thing we need is a column here that will give us the projected totals. Right, so again, I'm going to write a script that basically has two parts. The first part will do something on the first row. Right, if it's the first row, then I just want that total corresponding to December 2014, whatever appears in the first row over here. And then for succeeding rows, what I want to do is I want to apply my model, which is basically that I take the growth rate, I multiply the value in the previous month by 1 plus the growth rate, and that gives me back the new value, the new total for that month. All right, so let's go ahead and create another expression column. So I'll press FX, and this one I'll call total, right, just like we have a total column over there. So we're going to have a total column over here. And now again, I have to write another expression. And here again, we go in two parts. I'll say if row is 1, so if it's executing on the first row, then what I want to do, again, I want to look into this table, monthly actuals, name of the table, the name of the column, except in this case, I want to look into the total column. So it's the column name in square brackets, and I want to look into the row with index 0, which is the first row. So basically this says that if my script is executing in the first row of this table over here, then what I want is the total in the first row of this table over here. Okay, so that takes care of row 1. And I'll say else. Then what I want to do is, in the second part here, is I want to look, in each row I want to look one row up and get that value. And we already know that the syntax for doing that is this field -1, and then the name of the column, which in this case is total. Okay, so this is the syntax for looking one row up in the total column, right? So this will give me the value one row up in the total column from where the script is executing. And what I want to do is I want to multiply that by 1 plus the growth rate. Right? That's my model. I take a value for 1 month and I multiply it by 1 plus the growth rate, and that gives me the next month's value. Like I said, very simple one parameter growth model. So the question is, how do I get that growth rate? Well, the same way that I pull the value out of the monthly actuals table, I use the name of the table, which is rate, and then the name of the column, which is growth rate. And in this case, I don't need to use the row index because there is only one row. So if all I need to do is just reference the column like this. Did I spell that right? Growth rate. Yeah, I think so. So basically, this should give me the value in that table. So close parentheses, and that's basically it. All right, so again, just to reiterate, the script here, what it's doing is it's saying on the first row, if it's executing on the first row, just give me the total from the first row of monthly actuals. If it's executing on any other row other than the first row, then what you do is you look one cell up, one row up in that column, and then you multiply the value that you pull from that cell, you multiply it by 1 plus the growth rate, which is taken from the rate table. So let's see what kind of result we get from this. Press OK. And you can see that now we've got some totals here. If you're looking at it, you'll see that they're actually going down, and that's because I have a negative growth rate there. But if I were to change that growth rate, let's say I changed it, instead of negative 7%, I changed it to positive 7%, right? So positive 7% growth. Now you can see that it's starting from the last known total, right? That's the December 2014 total, and it's applying this one parameter growth rate, right? And so these numbers are getting bigger and bigger and bigger month by month based on the growth rate that I specified. Okay, so that's really the majority of the what if example, right? So this basically does it, right? If all you wanted to do was just be able to experiment with different growth rates and see how the numbers change based on growth rates, this is enough, right? You could go ahead and you could save this worksheet, and at any time you could come back to this worksheet and you could play around. You could try different growth rates, see how those numbers change. But the idea here is that we want to actually put a nicer face on this. We want to create a dashboard so that a user, rather than having to come into the worksheet and see the inner workings over here, we'll just give them a nice interface where they could experiment using a slider or some other kind of control, and they could see the projection in a chart or in a table or something like that. So let's continue on, and we'll make another expression column here. And this expression column will be similar to this one, except instead of saying actual, it will say projected. So press the FX button, and we'll call this one type, just like we did previously. Right? And this column is just going to return the word projected. Okay, so that's basically all we need from this table. I can hide this first column now. This is not doing me any good over here, so I'll just right-click on that column and say Hide Column. I don't need it. Right? You may wonder why it was there to begin with. It was there because, to go back a little bit, when you create an embedded table, right, when you go up here to New Object and create an embedded table, you have to create a table with at least one column. However, all of these other columns were expression columns, so each of these was created as an expression, so we were left with that first column empty. We don't need it, so I just hid it. Okay, so now we've got monthly actuals, we've got monthly projected. What I want to do is I want to get these two tables together. I want to union these into a single table, into a single data block that I can base my chart on. Right? So before I do that, when you want to do a union operation, which is basically just taking all of the records from one table and kind of sticking them on top of all of the records from the other table, you have to make sure that the columns match. Right? So if I look at the columns in these two tables, I've got here total, month, and type, and here I've got month, total, and type. That's going to create a problem if I try to union these together. So what I'll do over here is I'll just move the total column. I'll just click on the total column and move it over here. Right, so that the columns are in the same order: total, month, type, total, month, type, and now I'm good to go with the union operation. So I'm going to select these two tables, these two data blocks, and then I'll just go up to the concatenate table button in the toolbar, select union. Interesting. Let's see where the problem is. So something over here probably. Let me check the type. Yeah, so for my month column here, evidently I forgot to set the return data type, right? These computed months are of type date, right? And these months over here are of type date. So, or rather over here they should be of type date so that the union operation can go through. So I'm going to switch this to type date. and now I'm going to try it again. Hopefully these guys are okay. That's double, that's fine. So I think we should be okay now, and this must be string. Yeah. Okay, so we'll select these guys, and then back up to concatenate table, union. That gives me the union table down below, so I'm just going to make these a little bit smaller. We don't need to see all that stuff. And so this union table at the bottom is just basically, it just takes all of the monthly actuals, all the monthly projected, and just sticks one set of records on top of the other. And if we take a look at the preview, basically what we'll end up with here is you get all of the actual, right? These are all the actual sales for, however many months we have in the past. And then at some point, right over here, we transition into the projected, right, going forward from December 2014, January 2015, and so on. And then we'd get all the stuff from this table. Okay, well, we're almost done with the worksheet, so I'm just going to give this this final table, this final data block a name. I'll call it projected. And I'll set it as the primary data block, the primary table. Right, the primary data block, if you're just doing dashboards, what that means is that this data block, the one that's called primary, will be listed above all of the others. So when you're designing the dashboard, this basically is the most important data block. The notion of primary has other meanings for if you're developing reports and stuff like that, but for a dashboard, it basically just means that it gets listed first. So that's it for the worksheet. So I'll save that. If there's any questions on the worksheet, feel free to type in the chat box. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and we'll take a look at doing the dashboard. And the dashboard, I don't know if I'm going to take pains to make it, as pretty as this one, but basically it's just a chart, right? So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to set up a chart that has both the past and the future data. So let's do that. So I'll keep this worksheet open in the background, but I'll create a new view sheet based on this worksheet. So the worksheet is called What If Analysis Example. So I'm creating a new dashboard, a new view sheet based on this. Okay, so now I've got this blank dashboard. I'm going to add a chart, and this chart is just going to give me those sales month by month for the past and for the future. Okay, so I've got a big chart. There's my projected data block. That's the table that I designated as primary in the data worksheet. That's why it's listed above all the others. Right, so in there, I'm going to look for this month field. Right, so I'll grab the month field, put that on the x-axis. And you'll notice that when I do that, basically it gives me years on the x-axis. That's because the grouping for dates is always by default set to year. Right? But you can see that it is going into the future because remember that our last known data point is December 2014, so obviously 2015, 2016 are future dates. What I can do is I can switch that to display by month simply by clicking the Edit Dimension button and selecting month as the level. Right? So now I've got a projection based on months that goes into May of 2016. Right, and then what I want for the measure on the y-axis is just the total. Right, so now you can see that I've got my actual totals running up through the end of 2014, and then taking over in 2015, I've got my projection. Now, obviously, my projection looks a heck of a lot smoother than the actual values, and that's simply because we've got an extraordinarily simple model driving this. It's just a kind of a one parameter growth, multiplicative growth. So that's fine. Now what I'd like to do is I'd like to distinguish these based on color. So what I can do, I know that I've got this column here called type, and that distinguishes the actual values from the projected values. So I can grab this type field and just drag that into the visual area here. If I want to distinguish them by colors, I could drop it in the color area, and that will give me two different colors. And then obviously I can adjust this chart however else I like to make things look a little bit better. Perhaps I can increase the size of the line, or any other tweaks like that. Okay, so basically what this chart is doing now is the way the model works, it looks at the last data point, right? The sales for December of 2014, and that's where that's the value it takes for the initial projection. In other words, the first projected value is the last known value, and that's why this projection begins from the last known value. Now, in a little bit, we'll see how we can change that up a little bit if you wanted to use the average or some other measure, some other metric. But before we do that, let's see how we can allow the user of the dashboard to manipulate that growth rate, right? If I want to, I could change some of these titles, but it doesn't really matter. I don't like the look of these titles. I'll just have it say month. But yeah, so right now, this dashboard, if we were to leave it as it is, the user of the dashboard has no way to change that growth rate. So they'd be looking at this chart, and that's it. Now, if we want the user of the dashboard to be able to manipulate that growth rate, what we would do is we would add an input component. Right? So let's, for example, take a slider. A slider is one of the input components. There are other input components that would work in this context, like a spinner would work. Combo box would also probably work, but slider is probably the most appropriate. So I'm going to add a slider over here. Can make it a little bit bigger. All right, so there it is. Right now it doesn't do anything because I haven't told it what to do. But what I want it to do is I want the value that the user selects in the slider to control the value in this growth rate table. That's our parameter. And the way you do that is back in the dashboard here. You right-click on the slider, select Properties, right? And then you go to the Data tab. This is in the Slider Properties, the Data tab, and you can specify a target. And that target is something in the worksheet. It can be either a table in the worksheet or it can be a variable in the worksheet, right? In our case, we want to target a table and target the rate table, right? The rate table is the one that contains that single cell containing the growth rate. So I'll select that, right? And if the table were larger, in other words, if the table in the worksheet, if the rate table were a little bit bigger, then what you would do is you would press this button over here, and that would allow you to select the cell of the table that you want to control. But since this table is just one cell, there's nothing to select. It has to be column growth rate, and it has to be row 1. And it shows me here the value that's currently in that cell of that table. All right, so that's how I hook up the slider to the embedded table in the worksheet. So then I press OK. All right, now I'm going to get a very funny looking chart here, and the reason is basically the scaling on the slider, right? If I switch the slider to a percent representation, so if I just press the percent style in the toolbar, you can see that right now I'm picking off values like 8,000%, and right, so my growth rate is fantastic. In fact, it's so fantastic that it basically makes everything up until that point look flat. So obviously, selecting an 8,000% growth rate is a little bit silly. What I'd want to do is control the scaling here. So I would just go to Properties, go to General, and just pick something more reasonable, like a minimum of minus 0.5, 50% negative growth, maximum 0.5, 50% positive growth, and an increment of perhaps 0.01. And now we're going to get something more reasonable, and so I can pick reasonable values like 10% growth. If I want to be really extreme, I could look at 40% growth. Okay, that's what 40% growth looks like, and so on. So you get the idea. This is basically how you use an input control to modify the value in an embedded table in the underlying worksheet, and then of course the value in the embedded table is being used in the computation of these projected totals, which influences this final table that we made, the projected table, and since that table is the basis of the chart, when we make these adjustments, we see the chart change. Okay, so that is really, now you've seen the whole thing start to finish of putting together a what-if worksheet and dashboard, and basically you can see that it's based on the worksheet side, it's based on the use of embedded tables and expression column script, right? So we had some embedded tables where we defined the parameters. We wrote some expression column script that leveraged the values in those embedded tables and also in the actual data tables. And then on the view sheet side, on the dashboard side, we use these input components to modulate the parameter values. Okay, well, let's take a look at just a couple of twists on this, and then we'll wrap up. So the first twist is, what if we wanted, instead of starting from the last value here, in other words, the final December 2014 value, instead of using that as the start of our projection, what if I wanted to average all of these past values together and start the projection from there? Well, what I could do is just go back to the script in the worksheet, and I'm going to go back to where these totals are computed, right, which is over here. So I'm going to open up that script again. And what I'm going to do, instead of starting that first row, right, this is where my first projected total comes from. Right now I'm just pulling off the December 2014 value by looking into the first row over here. What I can do is I can just average, I'm going to take off the row index and just average all the values in that column together. So I'll just use an average function here. And so basically what this is saying is, it's saying look into the monthly actuals table, into the total column, and then take the average of all those values. Right? So that's what this first line is saying, and that's going to give me then row 1 over here is going to be the average of all the values in the total column over there. So that's just an easy tweak that you could make. So I can press OK, I can save that, I can go back over here, and probably I need to refresh this. Let me right-click and select refresh. Okay, and if you take a look at this now, right, you can see that the projection is now beginning from the average of the past values. Okay, so that's a simple thing. Now, just to wrap up, let's say, just one final twist, similar to what we have in this picture here. Let's say that I wanted to give the user of the dashboard control over which of those approaches we take. Do we use the final value to begin our projection, or do we use the average to begin our projection? So I could actually, I could do that. I could put a radio button or some other control here that would allow the user to modify that. So let's see how you would make that work. First of all, I'll go back to the worksheet, and I'm going to set that up in the table here, right? So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to define a variable that I can use in my expression. So let's define a variable. So I'll go up to New Object, Create Variable, right? And I'll call this variable, well, I guess I can call it, I'll just call it measure, right? And basically what this is going to be is it's just going to be a choice that the user makes of the last last point or average. Okay, so we'll just call it measure. Okay, and I don't think I have to do anything else over here. We'll just name it measure. It is type string. That's fine. Press OK. Right, so here's a variable. It's just sitting over there doing nothing right now. And now what I want to do is I want to modify the script based on that variable. So the way I want this to go is I'll go back in here and edit this expression for total. And so basically what I want to do is I want to adjust this starting value based on the value of that variable, and the value of that variable is then going to be set by the user in the dashboard. Right? So here's the modification that I'm going to make to the script. I'll say if variable measure, right? So parameter.measure, that's how I insert the value of that variable. So if that's equal to, let's say, last month, then what I want to do is have the returned expression be what I wrote previously, which was just like this, right? The final right. So in other words, if we're on row 1 and parameter.measure, which is the value of the variable that the user is going to supply, is equal to last month, then the starting value is simply going to be the value over here in the first row of the monthly actuals table. Then I'll say else. In other words, if the user selected something other than last month, then it's going to be the average, right? Because I'm only going to give the user two choices, either average or last month. Okay, so this is going to be the script then, right? So when the script is executing on row 1, if the user has provided a value for this variable, this measure variable, and if that value is last month, then that value in row 1 of this table is going to be a value for December 2014 from this table. Otherwise, it's going to be the average of all the values, of all the totals in that table. Okay. Now, I'm not quite done yet because I need to give the user of the dashboard control over that variable. Okay, so how do I do that? So now I've got this variable here, but so I can go ahead and save this. I want to give the user control over the value of that variable so that the user can select either last month or average. So I'm going to go back to the dashboard here, and I'll add a radio button. Select properties. And change the title to something like choose. And then I'm going to set up a list here, and the list in the radio button will have the choices will be last month, and the value that gets submitted if the user selects last month is going to be last month, but without the space like I used in the script. So in the script I used a value last month with no space, okay, or average. Okay, so I'll go over this again in just a moment, just in case any of this is not clear. Basically, I'm just setting up the values that appear in the radio button. Last month and average are going to be the choices. And now what I need to do is I need to get this radio button, right? So if I just leave it like this, I've got a radio button that doesn't do anything, right? So there's my choices, right? Last month. Yeah, I guess it looks better like this. Last month versus average, but right now this is a non-functional radio button because I haven't told it yet what to do. So what I'm going to do is go back into the properties, go to data, and I want to hook up this radio button to this variable that I defined in the worksheet, right? That's the variable called measure, right? It's this one over here. So if I go back to the worksheet, there's this variable here. I know that I'm using this variable in my script. In fact, the value of that variable determines which total I start with here, either the December 2014 total or the average of all the totals as my starting value. Right? So basically, if I want the radio button to pass the value, to set the value for that variable, I do this. I select variables, select the measure variable. There's really nothing else to set here, so I'll just press OK. And then I can save that. And now I'll just call this projection dashboard. Okay, and now this radio button should basically control, via the mechanism that I just illustrated, whether we see the average or just the projection from the average or the projection from the last month. Okay, so if I select last month, right, then this radio button submits a value of last month into that variable over here. All right, so it submits a value into this variable, and of course this variable is then used in the script. The variable is called parameter.measure. Right? And if it gets a value of last month, then it's basing that first row on the December 2014 total. Right? And if it gets a value of something other than last month, in this case average, then it bases it on the average. So that's basically the end of the example that I wanted to show you. All that's left to get it to look like the picture is just adding a background and some labels and titles. So I'll stop there. And basically, like I said, this is a very, very simple example, very simple model, but it shows you all of the mechanics of doing this type of projection, which again is principally based on embedded tables, on expression column script, and then on using input components like these to pass parameters into the worksheet. Okay, stopping there. If there's any questions, feel free to ask me now, again, by typing in the chat box or typing in the question box. Any questions? Okay, can you hear me? Ah, okay. Whew. Okay. Good. Thank you, Jim. Okay, I had a brief fright that I might have been talking for a long time and and nobody could hear me. Okay, thank you very much, Jim. Okay, I'll stay online for another minute or two. Thanks, Jim. uh, yeah, I'll stay online for another moment or two, just in case anybody's formulating questions. But for those of you who need to head off to other things, thanks for joining, and hope to see you back next month. And have a nice weekend. Okay, seems like there's no further questions. Again, if anybody wants to reach me, my email is david.fass@inetsoft.com. So if you think of a burning question as soon as I hang up the phone here, feel free to send me an email. I'll be happy to address it. And again, have a nice weekend, and see you back next time.